This is Political and Economic Change in China, Objective 2, about how revolution changed Chinese governmental traditions to create a communist state. Now, we're going to start here with not the ancient history, but the revolutionary period that happened between 1911 and 1949. And it begins with the revolution of 1911 that establishes this: the Chinese Republic. Now, if you'll notice, it's not the type of geography that they had during the imperial days of the Ming Dynasty and the various dynasties that existed before the Mongols. We actually have a republic in this particular sense that's separated into 5 major areas: Manchuria here, Mongolia, Xinjiang, Tibet, and China proper. Now, those particular areas were all considered independent republics at that time, with Sun Yat-sen as their first president. Now, most of the times when you hear about Chinese history, you hear about Mao. You don't hear about Sun Yat-sen. But as we established before, he is a very important figure in Chinese history. Now, regional warlords often challenged this new government. That was kind of the tradition in China. And eventually, a new leader evolves. And his name was Chiang Kai-shek. Now, we had done a little brief thing with Chiang Kai-shek in Lesson 1, but again, we want to go deeper into things now. Chiang Kai-shek establishes, bear with me here, the Kuomintang, or the Nationalist Party, and eventually becomes president of China. Now, as president of China, he tried to establish republican practices. But eventually, someone that he was familiar with would get his start and become the eventual ruler of China. And his name, and he's on the right here, is Mao Zedong. Here he is standing here with Chiang right here. Now, Mao would establish the Chinese Communist Party, and because of that, because communism was so different from the democratic and republican ideals that Chiang was talking about, he became an immediate outlaw. Now, as a result, Mao goes on what was called the Long March and was pursued by Chiang Kai-shek's army from 1934 to 1936. That's probably a date you'll want to be aware of. Now, over the course of time on the Long March, as he's going, he endured a lot of different hardships just to stay away from Chiang's army over the course of those couple of years. And as he is marching away from Chiang and managing to elude Chiang, the legend of Mao kind of grows and takes on a little bit of steam. Mao again manages to elude Chiang's army for a full 2 years, picking up followers along the way wherever he basically goes. Now, eventually, Chiang is going to have a whole other problem on his hands and won't be able to chase Mao anymore, because the 1930s in China also meant the invasion of the Japanese. Now, World War II would not begin until 1939, but like the Germans in Europe, the Japanese in Asia were expanding to various territories. In this particular case, you can see in the purple here the regions of China that they were expanding into, primarily Manchuria being the first one, and various other places as well. In examples like this is a brutal scene, and frankly one of the most brutal things I think I've ever shown on any kind of video to students. But Chiang basically had to give up chasing Mao to deal with the invading Japanese due to what became known as the Rape of Nanjing. Thousands, tens of thousands of rapes of women, beheadings of men. You can see right here, this guy, this picture is taken just shortly, like immediately after this guy's head is severed from the rest of his body. This was the kind of stuff, these kinds of atrocities, these attacks on civilians, were going to become commonplace in World War II. And as you can imagine, Chiang felt the need to deal with this the best that he could, and it really became a distraction for him away from Mao. But as a result, for Mao, the Long March again makes him a bit of a folk hero. And here, this is Mao on the right over here, and his second in command, Zhou Enlai, he's gaining followers all over China, while Chiang Kai-shek is actually trying to stem off the Japanese tide. Eventually, World War II is going to come to a close in 1945, and right after that, the war is over with the Japanese, but the Chinese now go to war with each other in a civil war between Mao and Chiang. Now, in this particular case, Chiang is going to end up losing, and he flees to Taiwan, also known as Formosa, in 1949. Now, Formosa became known as the Republic of China. Very important that you jot that down, the Republic of China. Mao, meanwhile, stayed in mainland China and formed the People's Republic of China, which was communist. Now, of course, Chiang is remembered with great reverence in what is today Taiwan, Formosa, for maintaining freedom and democratic ideals while mainland China turned communist. Now, when Chiang Kai-shek went to Formosa, known as Taiwan, right down here, and he established the Republic of China, and here's the nationalist flag of the nationalist party that Chiang Kai-shek had formed back in the day. When he establishes this, it creates this concept of the two Chinas. And that can be explained in a couple different ways. We'll get to that in a later lesson. But the two Chinas in this sense has to do with Taiwan and China. Now, of course, mainland China thinks that Taiwan should be part of them and that there should not be anything in terms of a quote-unquote two Chinas. In fact, Taiwan has always maintained their nationalism and their freedom. This is the flag of Taiwan here. And had a government that was recognized as the official government of China until 1972. After 1972, Richard Nixon visits China, and shortly thereafter, countries around the world start to recognize mainland China, communist China, the People's Republic of China, which is kind of an odd name, frankly, given what's going on there. They recognize them as the legal government of China and no longer Taiwan. Now, Taiwan itself is doing really just fine on its own. This is some landscapes, some scenery in Taiwan, a mix of very cultural and historical, but very modern ideas. Bustling cities in Taipei, this is the capital of Taiwan. Very modernistic, a nice shot of them at night. Very bustling cities during the day with plenty of commerce and plenty of economic freedom. Outstanding scenery that attracts tourists in. And a very thriving agricultural base that makes it possible for Taiwan's economy to survive. So they're not as big as China in these aspects, but they seem to be doing just fine on their own. But getting back to mainland China, after Mao takes over, the idea of Maoism becomes prevalent. Now, of course, Mao takes over in 1949, and in the years that followed, he'd get involved in a concept called Idealistic Centralism. Now, this, of course, is very strongly influenced by Karl Marx and Vladimir Lenin, and yet, and of course, Joe Stalin, who you can see in the picture here with Mao. And yet, it's still quite a bit different than the communism that the Soviets were practicing. Maoism became reliant on the agricultural peasantry. Leninism was more based on support for urban workers, or the proletariat, as it were. Also, Maoism was much more egalitarian, meaning it promoted equal rights, particularly in gender. It ended the idea of hierarchy in China, and as we've mentioned before, Mao, when he takes over, ends the whole concept of the mandate of heaven. Now, it sounds kind of weird that a communist would promote equality for women, or an authoritarian leader would promote equality for women, I should say. But there's one particular aspect where this shows up, and we'll get into that in the next objective. Some of the central ideas of Maoism include the ideas of struggle and activism to pursue the values of socialism. Mao felt that was necessary, that you had to struggle and you had to be an activist to decide what socialism was to be in China and how it should be pursued. And one other central idea to Maoism was the concept of the mass line. The mass line was the idea of communication between party leaders and peasants designed to improve the overall Chinese communist state. But above all else, whether it was the idea of struggle and activism to pursue the values of socialism or the mass line of communication between party leaders and the peasants, probably more than anything else was the idea of self-reliance, the idea you should rely on your individual talents to contribute to communities rather than waiting for the elite to tell you what to do. That is also very different than the communism that Lenin and Stalin practiced. Mao, Lenin, and Stalin all had read Marxist writings and studied Marxist philosophy, but what Mao was doing was a little bit different than what Lenin and Stalin had done, no matter how much Lenin and Stalin, or Stalin in particular, had tried to influence what Mao was doing. Okay, that's it for now. Thank you very much, and we'll see you on the next objective.